Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCullum, and today we are taking a look at a super cool rifle. This is a Swiss stay-behind guerrilla organization's suppressed anti-materiel rifle. It is the G150, and it was manufactured for and by the Project 26, or P26 organization in Switzerland. This is a group that was founded approximately 1981, and was shut down in 1991, but it was one of a progression of stay-behind guerrilla resistance organizations in Switzerland. The concept pretty much began during World War II of what if someone invades us? At that point it would have been probably the Germans that might have invaded. If the military can't resist them, then we'll retreat up into the mountains and engage in guerrilla warfare until we can kick the enemy out of Switzerland. Famous armed neutrality sort of strategy. With the advent of the Cold War and the progression of the Cold War, the attitude shifts, or the circumstances that this organization might exist in shift, because you have a serious risk of nuclear warfare across Europe. Nuclear warfare followed by occupation by someone, which would have been the Soviet Union. How do you resist that? Well, they formed this structure for P26 that was 40 geographical areas around Switzerland. They highlighted 6 of the major cities as the particularly important ones, but they had cells distributed across the entire country. The organization, the structure was 4-person cells. This was an organization that used both men and women, and they were men and women who were recruited not specifically out of the military, but people who had the patriotic mentality to be interested in participating in this, the aptitude for it, and legitimately, part of the recruiting strategy was people who just looked and appeared like normal, everyday folks that would never be the specific suspicion of being underground guerrilla fighters. So people were recruited, they were organized into 4-person cells. You would never know anybody outside of your individual cell, so that if one cell were compromised by enemy intelligence activity, it couldn't, that couldn't be exploited to bring down more of the organization. They actually had redundant cells in every geographical area. So if the active cell were penetrated and destroyed by enemy intelligence, there would be a backup cell in the same place to step up and take over operations. This was a pretty thoroughly planned out organization. They had a non-trivial budget that was sort of black slush money from the military. The whole thing was fundamentally laid out by a couple of high-placed people in the government and the military, but then the organization existed outside the general military structure. So they had weapons, they had explosives. Interesting, just to highlight the significance of the secrecy of this organization, when they did training exercises to learn firearms handling, explosives handling, sabotage techniques, that sort of thing, these were held inside bunkers in the Alps, and all of the participants would actually essentially wear ski masks the whole time so that they could train in groups of more than 4, but never be able to identify anyone else in the organization. Pretty sneaky Cold War spy, James Bond sort of stuff going on. Now, for weaponry, they had a variety of things. They had standard P75 pistols. That's the SIG 220, standard Swiss Army pistol at the time. They had suppressed MP5s. The guns that this organization equipped itself with were specifically chosen as being good guns for a resistance organization. So concealable pistols, suppressed MP5s, and they had G150 rifles. So this started as a bolt-action, basically sporting hunting rifle, made by SIG at the time on a JP Sauer action. SIG at this time owned JP Sauer. The P26 organization bought, I think, 250, in fact I know it's 250, of these rifles, and then made a bunch of new parts and assembled them into this configuration for storage in P26 equipment bunkers and eventual issue in case of need. Now, sorry for the interruption. Just want to remind you guys of the History of Weapons and War streaming service, where we have 10 different channels of historical, educational, small arms content with more than 6,000 videos, including exclusive and expanded content. Things including shooting.
That's all right. You ready for this?
Reloading.
The rim diameter. Now just
expert discussion.
I mean,
oh, look at this.
Deep dive information.
Which is effectively what it is.
Join today, get your first week free. Check it out. All right, so here's the G150. This would have been the part that was purchased basically commercially from SIG. So it's a standard hunting rifle action. It had its original commercial serial number right there. Then on the other side, a Swiss cross. Then we have the SIG marking, because they of course assembled the original hunting rifle, and then the serial number for the P26 organization. I guess it's a little unusual that a guerrilla resistance group would serialize its guns, but then again, this is a Swiss guerrilla resistance group. So this tag, by the way, is from the current collection that owns it. They didn't have QR codes in 1981. So serial number on this rifle is 1217, and they've marked that on both parts of the suppressor as well. So the design brief here was to make a rifle essentially as quiet as possible. And so the suppressor is extremely long. Think of this sort of like a Delisle, but even more so. They've coupled that with a custom loading of the 41 Magnum revolver cartridge. So this was originally like a standard sort of hunting rifle action. So the original action length fits like, well, this is 308. The original action length fits a full-length hunting rifle cartridge. They have a spacer in the back and actually a small spacer in the front. A 41 Magnum cartridge, which is 10.4 by, I can't remember exactly what length. And then they loaded it with a 409 grain round nose bullet because they basically wanted to maximize bullet weight while remaining subsonic in order to avoid a supersonic crack. So the magazine holds 3 rounds plus 1 in the chamber, theoretically. The rifle overall measures out at 1160 millimeters or 46.7 inches. It's a really long gun with all of this suppressor. Now, for a guerrilla organization, you do want things to be concealable for transport and hiding and such. So they decided to put a folding stock on it. And in order to have a folding stock, well, you can't, I guess they decided not to do that on the original traditional wood stock. So they manufactured new aluminum chassis for these rifles that have blocks for folding stocks. The stock here is patterned on what would eventually be adopted as the SIG 550 or Sturmgewehr 90 stock, but of course this rifle predates the Sturmgewehr 90. So this is machined out of aluminum, not molded plastic like the assault rifle stocks would be, and it predates them. So same general style. Same thing with the pistol grip. It's not a SIG 550 grip, but it is a grip from SIG's predecessor rifle to the 550. You can see in here they had to contour this chassis to fit the original safety, which would have been on the back of the wrist of the traditional wood stock. In addition, you have to open the stock in order to have space to remove the bolt, which, by the way, just requires pulling the trigger down, and then you can pull out the bolt. This is a Sauer action that uses 3 rotating locking wedges. So if I unlock the bolt with this catch and then rotate it like it's going into battery, we have these 3 locking wedges that protrude out. So this has locking recesses right here in the back of the receiver. That's how the action worked. The scopes on these are kind of a bit bizarre. So they're unmarked scopes, we think Schmidt and Bender, and they are 4 to 6 power. And if you're like me, you're probably thinking, oh, that's some sort of typo. It would have been like 1.5 to 6 power or 2 to 6 power. No, it is, in fact, like 4 to 6. Those are your options. Why they chose that, I have no idea. To me, it would have made a lot more sense to just like pick one, fixed, 4, 5, 6, simplify the scope, or, you know, actually make it a full range of 1 or 1.5 up to 6. But they didn't. They used a quick detach style of scope mount. So if I push this lever up, I can lift the scope out there. And then it pivots 90 degrees and unlocks from the front. So I can take the scope off for storage. They did serialize the scopes to match the rifles. The scope has a pretty normal windage adjustment setting here. The elevation cam, however, starts at 50 meters and only goes out to 200. 200 was the anticipated official maximum effective range, and having this granular of a BDC cam really makes sense for a very low velocity, heavy subsonic projectile. At the very end, between 175 and 200, you actually have 5 incremental clicks. So you have 5-meter increments in your BDC cam at the extreme end of the range. That goes down when you're closer in, but that's, this scope was specifically, clearly custom made for this application. Then the reticle is just a totally basic duplex crosshair. So you don't need mills or any sort of ranging stadia in here because that's all built into the elevation cam. And then for storage, I can also remove the front of the suppressor. Note that we have a rack number on here. There we go. So this is a telescoping suppressor. The barrel is solid out to here. Then you have vents in it. The gas can go backwards into this huge expansion chamber or forwards. Sorry, I have to zoom out so you can see the whole thing, or forwards into this whole section, which is full of a bunch of baffles. So a very, very effective suppressor. This would have been, I mean, clearly this is a Hollywood silent sort of gun, which is ideal for the sort of guerrilla warfare use it was intended for. All right, and there's the G150, disassembled and taken down as it would be for storage or transportation. All right, so anti-materiel rifle. We normally think of that as light armored vehicles, like it's just one step down from an anti-tank rifle. Generally 50 caliber, long range, that sort of thing. This is a very different take on the term anti-materiel. It is intended for shooting out to ranges of only about 200 meters and shooting at targets like radio antennas, radar installations, maybe like aircraft parked at an airfield, things that are fragile and can be destroyed with a subsonic, essentially heavy pistol rounds of 41 Remington Magnum. Now, the reason that they say anti-materiel is because it was specifically decided that they would not be shooting at enemy soldiers. And this comes from a lesson taken from World War II, where they were afraid if we shoot at enemy soldiers, the enemy will react by murdering our civilians. Retribution on the terms of like the Nazis in Czechoslovakia or in Poland or in France, where a couple of OSS agents or SOE agents would assassinate a high-ranking German officer, and in retribution, the Germans would massacre an entire village. The Swiss didn't want that to happen for obvious reasons, and so their conclusion was, well, if we don't shoot soldiers, then they won't retaliate against civilians, which I have to think is just adorably naive. Like, that's not the way it works. That's the way the rules are, but that's not how reality actually works. In reality, if the Soviets occupied Switzerland and a couple of Swiss P-26 guerrillas blew up an airplane and a radar base and some radio communications towers, the Soviets, or the Germans, or basically anyone who's acting as an occupying force like that, would totally just retaliate against civilians. They wouldn't look at it and go, well, we were going to massacre everyone in this little adorable alpine village, but because they didn't shoot soldiers, because they only actually shot at the radar equipment, well, we can't murder all the civilians. So I don't know where it's supposed to go from there, but that whole concept just seems fundamentally not reality-based to me. And had this actually been used, I have very little doubt that these would have absolutely, totally been used as anti-personnel rifles too. So of a total of 250 of these originally manufactured, 3 of them exist today outside of, I don't know what sort of deep army storage stockpiles the rest of them were put into. The P-26 organization was publicized in 1991. There was a big scandal around it. It was portrayed as being this group that was like on the cusp of secretly overthrowing the Swiss government, which I don't think is surreal. I think there's a lot of hyperbole attached to it. By 1991, the risk of a Soviet occupation of Switzerland as a result of nuclear warfare across Europe is not really a high likelihood sort of thing anymore. And so the organization had kind of probably run its useful course. It was revealed in public, big scandal. There was, in fact, some television coverage going into one of the P-26 equipment bunkers where they pulled out one of these rifles, and you can very clearly see it along with some of its ammunition that I think that was broadcast on Swiss television. So they came into the public eye there. I don't know what ended up happening to all of them. Like I said, 3 of them exist in some quasi-public collections. Who knows where the rest went? But extremely cool to get a chance to take a look at this one. If you would like to get another perspective on the P26 and the G150 rifles, Below on the Range has a video that was actually done on one of the other 2 of the known examples of these. So I'll link to that in the description text. You can check it out if you want to see another one of the G150s. Big thanks to the folks who made it possible for me to show this one to you. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.